This is the Change Physician, episode 224.
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of The Change Physician. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my Amazeballs co-host, Dr. Melissa Katie herself. Dr. Katie, how are you today?
I'm good, other than my voice a little crackly, but
Voice and crackly.
I feel fine.
Yeah, you're recovering from your escapades. For those who don't know and don't follow us on Saturday Salutations, which we do virtually every Saturday on Facebook as a Facebook Live, Dr. Katie is back from her world global trotting, where she was down in the Southern Hemisphere visiting New Zealand, Australia, and Tasmania. So you can catch us on the Saturday Salutations for that. But you're looking tired. I have to say that. You're looking
I'm
a little
tired, but I slept in this morning. So I'm probably just on the rebound of trying to wake up. So
yeah,
not a lot of makeup.
And what's the time difference? Is it 6? How big the time change is that?
From where we were, 15 or 17 hours, depending on what parts we were in.
Yeah. Okay, that's brutal. 12 is usually the worst, but I hate jet lag.
Yeah, I can't blame it. I mean, I had a full week of work already, and just I think the weird thing is I was waking up at 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. for no reason, and it wasn't like I was drinking alcohol the night before or something that stimulates you to wake up. So I think it's just I'm getting there, but yeah, I think I just slept in. So you're seeing me in my morning wake up.
Well, I wanted to talk about something today that you may or may not have been aware of because of planning your trip and was sort of in this interval. But have you heard of this term called quiet quitting?
I've heard it, but I don't know where I heard it. I remember someone using it. And
so it sort of rose to a head like when you were gone, because you were gone for a long time. But it was in the late August, I think. And apparently there was some TikToker and I don't use TikTok, so I don't really understand the whole platform. But this thing has caught like fire because he said, quote, "I recently learned about this term called quiet quitting, where you're not outright quitting your job, but you're quitting the idea of going above and beyond." And it has just been like shocking to me how much these two words have gotten such huge discussion. Like it just went like wildfire all over this place, and like quiet quitting. And first I was like, what the hell does that even mean? So I'm like looking at the term and trying to understand it. And then I was looking at the reactions, because you know me, I like to read the reactions on the stuff. And so before I get to what the actual term, I'm just going to say the reactions range from, there's these people like, "Oh my God, quiet quitting is the worst thing in the world. And if your employer, if I find you and you're quiet quitting, I'm going to fire you." And this, that, and the other thing. And other people are saying, "Well, why in the world, and this has to do with the term, if you're doing your job, what's the point?" Because, and this is the confusing part for me, is when you look at quiet quitting, literally what quiet quitting is talking about is not going above and beyond the responsibilities of your job.
So you're doing your job.
Exactly. And I'm like, it is the funny. I mean, it kind of brings me back to this idea of like our culture just loves to jump all over a thing, and with the assumptions, like define what the problem is that you're trying to address. Like before you start running in with your opinion, and granted, we do it too, we're human. But I like to really return, and I hope one of the parts of this podcast is, before you really engage and dig yourself a hole, understand the terms that you're dealing with here. And with quiet quitting, quite literally, that's what it is. It is simply doing your job to the levels of the job that is expected, but you're not going above and beyond and doing extra work. And that, for basically the entirety of employment, is called doing your job. Yeah. So the problems I feel around, it's a horrible word, because by quiet quitting, there is a sense that you are somehow doing less than what you're supposed to. And there's a negative kind of connotation to the word where I can see, as if you're an employer and you hear people talking about quiet quitting, you wouldn't want quiet quitters without understanding the term. You wouldn't want to employ quiet quitters, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, if you simply literally is, instead of saying quiet quitting, is you do the job for which you are employed and which you are obligated, your contractual obligations. You are getting X amount of dollars for the services that you are rendered, and that's what it is. Anything above and beyond that is extra and should never, ever be viewed as yeah, as a not an expectation or something, but basically that is something more that you're entitled to. So if you're an employer
Mm-hmm.
and you're employing someone, you have your job description and this is what they're supposed to do. And if people are able to perform their job to the abilities rendered, they're employed, right? There's a good employee there. If you were saying, these are my written instructions for you, this is what the job description is, but not written into the job is things like, I'm going to use horrible examples here, but you're supposed to walk my dog and you're supposed to get me coffee and you're supposed to do all this extra stuff.
Yeah.
A, that's not fair to your employee, and B, that is kind of ridiculous. On the same token, if you're an employer, if you have an employee that is doing their job, but then says, well, I'm doing your job, but since I'm doing the job, I'm going to eat all of your food in the break room, and I'm going to take all the office supplies home, and I'm going to do all this stuff because that sense of entitlement that somehow is above and beyond, that's not, it's not quiet quitting. It's simply doing your job. And whether you are expecting somebody to do more of their job that you are not paying them for, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Or you're an employee and you're taking more from your job than what is part of that contract. Like, again, office supplies is like an easy one, or people taking equipment or using services that they're not paying for, or that also is wrong. So there's the discussion that we're having around this term that is rising so much ire really could be negated if we simply agreed that if you have a job, you do the job as you were expected to do, and anything above that is great, but it's not required. And if you're an employee and you're doing a job, if you're actually taking things from your job, well, that's wrong too. I mean, in a lot of situations that can be actually theft. I mean, that can be literally theft. But I just didn't understand why people get so upset about this. And and this has been coming up in healthcare a lot. Mm-hmm. So there's at least 3 articles that I pulled up. One's on Mudscape, one's in Newsweek, one's in Becker's, which is like a surgical center kind of a thing. And they're talking about quiet quitting and the dangers of quiet quitting. And again, the one on Medscape was just telling, because it was written by a psychologist. And again, like the very, very first sentence, or the very first, or the second paragraph is basically the part I've been arguing here, that quiet quitting is a misnomer. Individuals are not quitting their jobs. Rather, they are quitting the idea of consistently going above and beyond in the workplace as necessary, right?
Yeah.
Go to the comments of that article. And it's like blah, 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 blah. And these doctors, it's a calling, and if you don't go into it, if you're blah blah blah, and if you're not putting everything in your heart and soul and your blood and your tears and killing yourself, then it's wrong. And I'm like, this is such crap. If you are self-employed, obviously you can put as much as you want into it, but the vast majority of physicians in this world are now hospital or health system employees.
Yeah.
These health systems, in the majority of the situations, and anybody out there has an example of contrary to what am I going to say, please send it to me, because I have literally been spending about the last 15 years trying to find an example counter this. But there is no loyalty to physicians as employees. Just like most of corporate America, there's very, very little loyalty anymore. The corporate contract has devolved. So if you are going to feel free to hire people and fire people at will, or replace them at a whim, or expect from your physicians, over and above performance and not compensate them, or overschedule them and expect them to do more, or stay extra, not being paid more, to do 50,000 different tasks that are coming in your inbox, then don't expect your employees to have any loyalty to you, and certainly don't expect them to go above and beyond. Yeah. So, the whole thing just infuriated me, because there's this idea that somehow quiet quitting is like people doing less than they're paid for. No, they're doing what they're paid for. They're just stopping to do above and beyond, and especially relevant to a culture that doesn't appreciate that kind of relationship between an employer and employee anymore. If you don't care about your employees aren't going to care about you. Why would they want to do above and beyond?
No. So a couple comments, if you're
please comment away, because I could keep ranting.
Yeah. So I have a few notes I made here. So the quiet quitting, I hate the word. It's loaded when you say quitting. Um, I quite like to me, I'm thinking like you're leaning out your work commitment. You're not over, you're not, basically giving so much of yourself. You have nothing left for yourself, and this idea of, you give this example of on both sides, like, taking advantage. Basically, you don't want either side to take advantage of each other. You don't want to be the one stealing all the office supplies from your employer. Like, that's inappropriate. And it may not be in the contract that way, but you sign, but it's kind of like one of those things that, okay, that's overhead. Those are expenses. You use what's appropriate for the job you're doing. You don't, if you're quiet quitting, you're leaning out your efforts to just the minimal responsibilities. You're not going to go and over consume supplies, like do the opposite when it comes towards the employee. Like, that doesn't make sense. But you don't want the employer taking advantage of the physician, especially all those things you talked about. Like, the thing that bothers me the most in healthcare when it comes to employers and these big institutions stuff is for them to say you're replaceable. Like, you're replaceable, we can just take anyway, because they're basically saying the minimal responsibilities are perhaps somebody willing to go above and beyond that has been brainwashed into thinking that you give up your soul, your life, your energy, your health at the sacrifice of your relationships with your wife or husband and your children, and 30 years later you realize you have no relationship and they don't know what a good relationship. I mean, you could go on and on and on, and how there's a trickle effect on the entire community or society. So I think they need to change the word. I think it's horrible. I mean, quitting sounds like quitting. I think personally it's about self-care, and you're trying to do what you've promised but still take care of yourself. And there might be those times where a patient really, your commitments to the patient, regardless of what you sign, you might go above and beyond for that patient because your heart and soul says this person needs that, and you're a humane person. So you do what feels right, but at the same time, you just fulfill your responsibilities. And I've been in those situations personally to know that there are so many times that I didn't get paid for what I did. And knowing that other people that just didn't give a, flying flip would have never done what I did. And it may just be personality. It could be a flaw of mine. You could say whatever. But I knew that it felt right and it felt good, whether it's my personal benefit or for the patient. And I didn't get paid extra. I could have just stopped it at the beginning, took care of my minimal responsibilities, but that didn't feel good. So I think there's a balance between, if it feels right and you feel good about your day because you did that, that's one thing. But to feel compelled that you have to always give up so much of yourself, you have nothing left for yourself or the people that are at home. I think we do a bad job in the US about supporting the mental health, because it's invisible. It's like we can ignore it. Like, I was talking earlier about Gabor Mate, and some of these people talk about, trauma. And I thought there was one comment that was really interesting about our country and how we have so much trauma in our country, but we don't talk about it. I don't feel like, even just acknowledging the history of our country. I know I'm going on a tangent, but we're not honest. We're not honest with ourselves about our culture that we're working in. This situation, I don't even think we're labeling it well, considering the vocabulary we use, but we're not being honest with ourselves and being, I don't know what the word is. Maybe you can help me out there, Kevin. But it's, first of all, you're not quitting.
You're not quitting. And one of the things that you said was really key is if you choose to go above and beyond, that's different. If you're feeling compelled to go above and beyond, that's not the same thing.
Right.
So, and it comes down to this question of agency, right? Yeah. So if
it's not out of guilt,
it's not out of guilt. And I think that's really important, because people can hear this and I think most people, and particularly in physicians, have been in spots where they've gone above and beyond because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at this, again, this horrible term of quiet quitting in healthcare, I think that is the fine point that people are having a problem with, because it is not, if you're walking in and you have somebody who's coding on the table and all of a sudden it hits 5 and you're like, oh, I'm out, that doesn't happen. Right. And people don't want to see that happen. On the other hand, though, it is very easy to be taken advantage of in healthcare with the expectation of, well, you didn't go into medicine to make money. And 99% of the people didn't go into healthcare to make money. I can tell you that right now. Yes. Do they make good money? Yes, they do. But they didn't do it specifically for that. And so there is and these institutions are, I do think they take advantage of people. They take advantage of physicians by kind of using the guilt trip thing. So once we move beyond this idea of I'm doing it because I choose to do it and it's the right thing to do and I feel good about doing it.
Yeah.
To a sense of I'm feeling compelled to do it. I don't know what I need. I don't know what the right situation is. Something needs to be more, and no one else is stepping up. And I feel like I have to do it because no one else in the system is making the time. That's an issue.
Yeah.
And that's something to start bringing up, particularly if you're employed or whatever. That's when you need to start setting the boundaries and you start actually looking at what you're supposed to be doing, and you have to look at the resources around it.
Yeah.
But it's not quitting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simply not this stupid term of quitting. It's setting effective boundaries in your work relationships.
Yeah. For some reason, the moment you said boundaries, I'm thinking not just business relationships, I'm thinking personal relationships and learning how to establish those. And I don't think a lot of people are great at that, especially it gets a little muddy, it's like, at what point is it your responsibility versus is this like a sense of guilt that, that you have to do it, even though it's not necessary. Like I think it's hard to know exactly where that starts and, stops.
And I think that's one of the big differences with you're looking at healthcare professions. There are many different types. Physicians have been fairly unique for hundreds of years, though, because it has gone beyond this idea of it being a calling, of it being not just a profession, but part of your identity has been very, very true. The training that in our training, okay, so we finished 20 years ago, so I don't know what it is exactly currently. I was really at the beginning. So my intern year, we didn't have work hours restrictions, and then they started introducing them later on. So that whole thing was up in the air. So I don't know exactly all the impact of how that's been, but there was expectations. Like you went into this, there was no clocking out. There was no, this was it. And you did it because you really, really felt engaged. As we have, as our relationships with our work and as our relationship with our practices and our relationships with our own personal agency have changed, those boundaries have changed. And I think some of the struggle that we have in physicians, particularly around this term of, what is your responsibility to your job versus your responsibility to your health and setting boundaries effectively, really comes under understanding as well, what is the role that we're working in now? And to expect 50, 100 years ago, when physicians learned in sort of, they learned in medical school residency, and we had this kind of almost apprenticeship where you're going through this long training process. And then you went out and you were in control of your practice and you're practicing medicine that way. That's a very different environment now, where you don't have necessarily all the responsibilities of being self-employed in your own practice. But you shouldn't, and you don't have you don't have the advantages of that. But then to have somebody who's an outside employer dictating what their specific boundaries are with what they expect from you, but then invading in your own personal boundaries, which is inappropriate because, if I'm trying to say here is basically, if you are self-employed or you are the business owner, you can do whatever the hell you want, right? As long as it's legal. But once you switch that role to an employed role, you cannot inflict or inject your boundaries upon somebody else and say, this is what you're going to do, unless it's part of the actual written contract, or at least what the expectation with employment is, right? They can't say, I'm going to pay you X dollars, a 40-hour work week, but I'm going to expect you to work 100 hours a week. That's illegal. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So I think we're kind of struggling as a profession in some ways, where we're still identifying as a calling and internalizing this role of who we are in a system where we no longer control those aspects. We don't have full agency to be in that calling anymore. Like you want to be a physician, you identify as a physician, but you're not in a place where you can actually be a physician as a kind of core identity anymore, unless you own your own practice or unless you are in an environment where you have direct decision-making control on the day-to-day factors involved in practice.
Yeah. Everything you said was stirring up a whole bunch of stuff. I think there's a complexity here with when you are going into medicine, there is there's a certain type of person that decides to go through medical school. There are people that jump out the first year realizing this is not for me. And for those listening that have not gone to medical school, it's really hard to like get kicked out of medical school. Like you have to like really screw up. They're there to support you and get you through. It's not like what you hear with, I don't know, with attorneys or other place where I don't know. I don't know the numbers, but the point is there's a certain type of enthusiasm. Of course, you tend to be young when you go into this. You have such a drive. There's a typical type A personality. There's the kind of person that's going to put in more than the minimum. That's just, I think, would you agree, Kevin, that most of us are like that going through medicine? So you go through the training and you have this vigor, enthusiasm, drive, and like you said, you didn't clock in, clock out. And I was part of that, like, in 2000, I think it was like 2003, 2004, I think 2004 or 5. That's when the 80-hour work week, I had to document my hours. It was 126 hours in 1 week. Which, what do? Just like not support the patients? Like there's still work to be done, and it's on you and your crew of residents, but or interns. But there is also this entrapment that happens. Not just like you said, most people don't go into it for money. Now, I will say I've noticed some physicians that the money becomes very enticing as they start making more, and sometimes some of them can get a little greedy and get the best of them. But so I guess you can call it some narcissistic qualities or whatnot. But just the identity in society, the status itself can kind of hold you there, and then you feel compelled maybe to do more, and you keep getting praise for from the patients per se, not necessarily from the employer. And I think sometimes that makes you stick to that, going above and beyond in a way. Like it's, I guess you can call it some brainwashing in the work environment, but then you get the praise from certain patients. Although I find that that's kind of, there's some distrust of the medical system now. So I'm wondering how that's all going to play out.
There's a good reason for that, but
go ahead, comment on it.
No, I mean, I think there's a good reason there that there's distrust of the medical system, and I don't want to bring that up too much in this episode, because I bring it up all the time. I bring it up all the time. So I am a little bit, if people aren't skeptical, I'd be a little concerned, because that means they don't know, or they're just way too trusting. But I do, coming back to this idea of these expectations, right? And I think that's the issue that I have with this. If you are expecting someone, no matter physician or anybody else, to go above and beyond what they're being paid to do, their employed relationship to do, then you have to provide another reason other than, well, that's just what we want. And the expectations of society that, physicians make too much, or why are you complaining? You make this many dollars, without knowing exactly what they're doing, what's included in that, how many hours they're actually working, what their call schedule may be, just on the blanket idea of, oh, well, you just make too much, and you should just serve me because that's your role as a physician. that's idea of compelling. And I don't like, that really raises my hackles. I'm a porcupine about this stuff. I have, and there's probably some pathological things, some psychiatrists, other psychologists can tell me what my little psychological pathology is. But when my agency is impacted, like if I feel any threat to my agency, it immediately raises red flags. And when people tell me that I'm supposed to do something or because of something outside of whatever the social contract is, the business contract is, that infuriates me. If I choose to do it, that's a different standard. If I choose to, I'll go above and beyond. We've all done it. But don't tell me I have to when there is no contract for it. And that may be one of the root of this whole thing, is this whole idea that people are saying, well, you need to do this, even it's not written in there, but you're supposed to go above the job description every day of your life just because you're employed. That's absolute crap.
Yeah.
It's the difference because there's the two E's. There's entitlement and engagement. And that's what the dancing around this. Everybody wants, you want an engaged physician. If you're an employer, you want engaged employees. In order to have engagement, you have to have demonstrated behaviors and actions consistently that you deserve that engagement. What everybody's really talking about is entitlement. And most of us hate entitlement. If you were feeling entitled because you write somebody's paycheck, that you control every aspect of their life, that they need to stay after hours after every clinic to answer the 42,000 tasks coming into the inbox, and you feel entitled to that, that's wrong. In the same way, if you're an employee and you think, well, I'm entitled to abuse my employer because, I'm an employee now and I can do whatever I want. I can take 2-hour lunches and I'm only going to see one patient an hour. That's wrong. So, so let's come down to the root of the discussion when it comes to this idea of quiet quitting. It's not quitting. It's about engagement and entitlement. Entitlement is wrong. Engagement is earned. So if you're an employer, earn those engaged employees, and you, shockingly enough, you're going to find them, and you're going to have them, and you're going to contain them. And by the way, employer, it's not by giving them a pizza party or a little sticker that says, good job with all your COVID patients. It's actually promoting a workplace that people want to come into and give their best. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to have engaged employees. Don't expect that. You're not entitled to it if you're not doing that. In the same way, if you're a physician and you're doing the minimum, taking care of your people, you're not covering your call, you're waving off your responsibilities because you just feel entitled because I got my degree and now I'm the doctor. You're not entitled to any of that stuff. And when people fire you or people get mad or give you bad reviews, don't get angry. Change.
And this is the Change Physician podcast. I'm going to have to make that a trailer.
Yeah.
You just rolled with that one. I have a few people that need to listen to that.
Well, this is really what it comes down to, really, is people just don't, entitlement is not something, it's annoying, right? And not only is it annoying, it can be dangerous.
Yeah.
And everybody wants engagement, but they don't want to do the things that are necessary to get engaged employees, and that just frustrates the living crap out of me, because you have so many companies, it's not just healthcare, that abuse their employees, that, put onerous work restrictions or micromanage them, instead of letting them do their job that they can do well. For whatever reason, they want to butt in and try to, because they're like, well, they're doing their job, but if they can do their job without me, where's my role as the manager? So I must micromanage them to now justify that my existence here because they're doing so well without me, which is like the stupidest thing that happened, but it occurs all the time, right?
Yeah.
So, just get out of it. To engage people, you have to be worthy of engagement. And if they're not engaged, the first person you need to look at, if you're a corporation, the first, because since corporations are individuals now, according to the Supreme Court, the first person you need to look at is yourself. Why aren't they engaged? Not, oh my God, these people are bad. They're quiet quitting. They're only doing their job as described. Screw you.
Sing it,
yeah.
Kevin. No, I love it. I think we should end right there. I think that pretty much summed it up, unless there's something else you want to add.
No, I'll just keep
Okay.
ranting. So take us out there, Melissa.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining the Change Physician podcast. Kevin revealed some, I guess, downsides to this whole quiet quitting thing. It might involve you changing as, if you're the owner and trying to micromanage your staff, it might be important for you to reflect on yourself and maybe how you're engaging or not engaging in a healthy way with your staff. If you don't know what the Change Physician is all about, feel free to go to changephysician.com. We'd love to have you there as a member, whether you're a physician or a physician ally. And until next episode, take care.
Stay well, folks.